Hello, everyone. Today, Daniel and I are back here to talk with you about the similarities and differences between the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and the Ukrainian conflict going on today. For one, there was Russian involvement in both conflicts. Before we get started, please like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more intriguing historical parallels. So let's get started. Last time we talked about a lot of similarities, like a small country fighting off aggression from a bigger neighbor, the victim country using mobile, flexible defense, and the other country using having more hierarchical command. So today we're going to move on to some more similarities and differences. And one is the switching of the main front line, the main center of gravity. So the Yom Kippur War, the first decisive battle was the Golan, because that was very close to population centers. Israel was very concerned about the Syrian army reaching those population centers, and they actually did. Luckily, the areas they reached had already been evacuated of civilians. But Israel quickly mobilized the reserves. They reached the Golan Heights and managed to push back the Syrian forces. And a few days into the war, the center of gravity moved to the Sinai. Similarly, in Ukraine, the main battle was first fought for Kiev and then switched to the Donbass, Kharkiv, and Kherson region in the south. So I wonder, Mr. Wenzel, if you have any comments on that similarity.
Hello. Yes, I agree that there's great similarity here. The initial attack in both cases, among other targets, threatened the most important, the most sensitive areas of the country, highly populated. In case of Israel, the Galilee, which is populated by Israelis, was in the area that could have been captured with horrific consequences, could be captured by the Syrians. Israelis rightly decided that the center of gravity of the war is defending Golan, which is indirectly defending Galilee. They didn't have enough forces to defend against the other major attack from Egypt, but they felt that the Sinai unpopulated area was not that critical. So they wanted to protect population center. In case of Ukrainians, the most sensitive area, the highest population, was in Kiev. It's a city of 3 million people. The areas around Kiev also highly populated, center of the political control of the country. So Ukrainians felt that if Kiev were to be captured, the whole resistance of the Ukrainian nation could be jeopardized, and maybe the country would collapse. So they focused at first on defending the main line of attack from the north. Russians were coming toward Kiev, and Russians were hoping to capture Kiev literally within 2 or 3 days, or maybe 4 days. As it happened, Ukrainians defended fiercely areas around Kiev, and they were fortunate enough that the big Russian army was suffering from serious logistical problems. They were not too well coordinated in their attack against Kiev. There was one attack coming from Belarus, another from further east, from Chernihiv, Sumy area, and they managed to defend and successfully beat back the Russians back toward. They had to leave the area of Ukraine along that line of attack. So yeah, you are absolutely right. There's great similarity here, that there was different.
Another similarity, as we're talking, that the Russians were, in terms of expectations, like you said, the Russians were expecting to just overrun Kiev in a few days. The Syrians, same thing in Golan. They expected to just overrun, take Israel by surprise on the holy fast of Yom Kippur and just overrun the Golan and maybe get even further into the Upper Galilee. And that actually worked against them because on Yom Kippur, it was very easy to mobilize the reserves, and Israel relied on their reserves. The majority of the standing army was defending Israel was the reserves. And on Yom Kippur, the roads were all open. So normally it would, trucks transporting tanks and personnel and equipment would have been stuck in traffic jams trying to go up to Golan in time. And during Yom Kippur War, it's forbidden to drive. So the roads were just completely open. Soldiers, tanks, and equipment were just rushed to the front lines. They got there with remarkable speed. Also, the soldiers themselves were easy to find because everyone knew where they were. They could only be in synagogue or at home. They're special officers, and they had a special radio called Gal Shaket, because it's forbidden to turn on electronics during the Holy Fast. There's a special radio that lets out a noise if there's an emergency. So during Yom Kippur War, those channels were activated, and the reserves reached the front lines at remarkable speed, even faster than Israeli high command thought they would arrive. So it completely worked against the Syrians' plan of attacking Israel when they were weakest, and actually allowed the IDF to push them back, surround them in a cauldron, and push them out of Golan much quicker than they thought. So like in Russia, it wasn't so easy to just overrun Golan.
But
and
here
push
I would put this in the column of differences, because Syrians really wanted to capture Golan, a small part of Israel, very small, and then they didn't think big enough to capture even Galilee. They were nervous about moving toward Galilee. They came to a bridge on the River Jordan, but they didn't dare to cross it. Russians were thinking much bigger than the Arabs. They were planning to capture the whole of Ukraine if possible. I mean, they really wanted to capture Ukraine, and they believed that they could. And they thought in a few days they would be not just in Kiev, but the whole Ukrainian defense would collapse. They also had a crazy expectation that a lot of Ukrainians would just surrender and would maybe even join and be happy that they are liberated somehow from being Ukrainian. Kind of hard to follow that logic, but Russians went for the kill to take the whole country. Arabs, Syrians just wanted to capture Galilee. Egyptians were actually expecting even less. Sadat said to his commanders, just give me like one piece of Sinai that I can hold on to, and then I will start negotiating peace and getting Israelis, beat Israelis at the diplomacy, at the negotiation table.
Yeah. Egypt had much more limited goals because their goal was to just break the myth of Israeli invincibility. Although I would say that Syria, if they thought that they had a chance, would have liked to capture
They would
parts
have
of
liked
Galilee.
to, but they
just
didn't even dare to think.
Yeah, they didn't believe they had a chance. Actually, the part you mentioned about tanks reaching the bridges, that there's some debate on that. Some people say that they stopped because of an operational pause, because they were waiting because of their hierarchical command. They were waiting for permission to continue pushing towards the Jordan River, and some say it was because they were scared. They thought there's no way that Israel's this unprepared.
They thought it was a ruse.
Yeah. And completely destroyed us in the 6-day war is this unprepared, and so there's some trap waiting for us, and we're not going to go any further because just something's off here.
So here's another difference, that Arabs have fought several wars prior to Yom Kippur against Israel. So they already knew that they respected the opponent, Israeli opponent. Also, Israelis fought several wars before over the last 20 years, and they were definitely well prepared. They had mobilization orders and systems. They knew which unit was going where. They were definitely much better organized than Ukrainians, who were practically fighting their first war against the Russians. Russians attacked them first in 2014 and surprised completely, but Ukraine was unprepared to offer any resistance in 2014. So Russians just waltzed in and took away from them their Crimea, Lugansk, and other parts of Donbass, but didn't really fight. A Ukrainian army was almost non-existent. And then between 2014, the following 8 years, Ukrainians spent building their army, just starting their army. And the first test of that army was in the fire of the Russian attack in February 22. So Ukrainian defense wasn't as well organized and coordinated as Israeli was. But on the other hand, Arabs were very well prepared for Yom Kippur because they respected their Jewish opponent. So they prepared their attacks to the T. Whereas the Russians were very disrespectful of Ukrainian army.
Yeah,
They thought
that's
that there's,
interesting because in this, I just have to interrupt here to say that in this case, Russia was like Israel, where Israel underestimated the Arab opponents. They were living in this
yeah,
aura of 6-day war and believed that the Arabs were incapable of defeating them. And because of this false sense of confidence, it cost them a lot of lives because they just were not prepared for
and that's what
Arabs
happened
to mount a
with
successful attack.
that's what happened with the Russian lives. They lost, Lord knows how many, probably close to 30,000 people by now, dead, because they didn't respect their Ukrainian enemy. Now, 3 months later, they do respect Ukrainians, and they attack them in a very measured, deliberate way. But the first weeks of attack was just, hey, let's go and just destroy those losers. And then they got a nasty surprise from the Ukrainian defenders. So this is another difference, that Russians were the ones that disrespected the bigger guy, disrespected the little opponent, whereas in case of the big guy, the Arabs, they did respect their smaller opponent, and they came fully prepared.